Larry, what's up, man? Great to see you again, and of course, have you back on the podcast.
What's up, man? It's good to see you.
It is. Last time we were in St. Louis, I guess, right? Was it St. Louis
Yeah.
that we bumped
Breakfast.
into each other? Yeah, we went to
Yeah.
breakfast, but I can't. It all kind of started to blend together. I was traveling around so much for a very short period of time. And I'm like, I was in Texas, and I was in, I think, Florida, and then I went to St. Louis. I was all over the place for a little period of time. So it's hard to string together when it all blends together like that, you know?
Yeah, man. It was probably 6 months ago. And you actually introduced me to a Mexican breakfast that I've never had.
Well, there you go. Somebody probably introduced that to me because I
Right?
like when it, not probably, somebody definitely did, because when it comes to the logistical side of things, that's just something I do not do. I struggle in that department.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
All I
Well, it's
know is
cool to,
is the beans, man. The beans at breakfast made the rest of the day very interesting.
I don't remember that, but I'll take
I
your
do.
word for it. We'll just go with that. No, it's always good to talk because you and I started, I think you started uh a little before me, if I remember right, or right around the same time. I can't remember when you started your movement, which was the Good Dad Project initially, and now it's the Dad Edge, is right? That's kind of the rebranding that you did over the past several years.
Yeah, you and I met in April of 2015 in a Facebook group where we were rating and
Mm,
reviews everybody's new podcast. And I remember actually
okay.
coming across yours. And I was like, man, this guy's story is so similar to mine. And I loved your story from the get go. And then that's how you and I connected.
Yeah, we've been good friends ever since, helping each
Yeah.
other, supporting each other. I've been on your show a couple of times. You've been on my show a couple of times. And then, through the process, you even have a new book I know coming out next year as well. And I've got my book that came out about a month ago. Our timetable is just so funny how it overlaps, and it's kind of like the same trajectory, it seems like.
Yeah, man, it is crazy. There are so many similarities. And yeah, I mean, my book it is weird, man, because I knew that you were working on a book, but I didn't know what the launch date was. And then my book was also supposed to come out in September, but unfortunately, my publisher went bankrupt. And so that put a just a kibosh on the whole thing. So I
That
had to go out.
tends to change things around a little bit.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is you and I actually, so I had the same publisher, and
Yep.
I was receiving my royalties, or so I thought. And all of a sudden, royalties shut off. I'm like,
Mhm.
wait, what? You're not going to pay my royalties for the past year? All right, what are we going to do? And the gentleman, and I do say gentleman actually, and I mean that, the gentleman reached out to me, and it actually ended up working out for the better because now I own my book. And
Mhm.
that was an awesome benefit, but it's hard in the midst of things, whether it's dealing with kids or relationships or business failures, to have an optimistic view of how life is going to be when we're in the midst of baggage and bullcrap. But things tend to work out for the better if you can keep yourself in the game.
Yeah, I look at my situation. I look at that situation because I know you had the same publisher, and yeah, I know you refer to him as a gentleman. He is a good man, the guy who owns that publishing agency. I was like, man, that really sucks, But it was a good time to find out because I found out about 6 weeks before the launch of the book, and it gave me, enough time to like, well, what do I want to do here? And obviously, being in the podcasting world, I was connected to an agent, and now that I hired that agent, and now that agent is going to work to get us a book deal with one of the big five, hopefully. So we should actually, as you and I are recording this, we should actually hear this week what direction we're going to go in. But yeah, it was a blessing in disguise. I would have rather come out in September, but blessing in disguise.
Of course, yeah. You want it to work out the way that you want it to work out, and then when you look back, you think, oh, that actually worked out pretty good
Yeah,
in spite of everything I felt like I was going through at the time.
right.
What's
Exactly,
the
man.
name? What's the name of the book?
It's called The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood.
Right on, man. I'm stoked to read it. I know you look, I refer so many people your way because obviously this is a big issue for men. How do you be a good father? I didn't really have a framework or a roadmap when I was growing up. I know you didn't as well. And so, man, I failed in so many ways, and I fail every day. I failed today. In fact, that I can think of. I fail in so many different ways. And man, it's one of the most challenging but gratifying things that you can do is this fatherhood.
It is. And that's the thing, man. When we come from backgrounds like you and I did, where there really is like no blueprint, there's no good example. And I love the fact that, I mean, you and I work with men every day, man. And I honestly believe that there's two types of men. There's the men that will lean on that negative experience growing up and just be like, well, I can never have a successful marriage. I can never be a successful dad because that's what I didn't have. And or you have the type of guy who's like, nope, I'm going to do this differently because I didn't have a good example growing up, and it's going to be different, and I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to be diligent about it. And I honestly think that's what you and I have done, and a lot of other men that we lead have done. But you're exactly right. It is completely and totally a practice. There isn't one day, man, that I don't just completely and totally fall on my face. And I mean, I even have a course called Creating More Patience, where I teach men how to be more patient and calm with their kids. And I lose my patience. And I'm sitting there thinking, like,
Mm-hmm.
holy crap, dude. Like, I actually designed a course around this, and I can't even take my own advice from time to time.
Do you ever feel like you're writing information or putting podcasts out in the world or putting together this course like this or a book where you're actually not doing it for anybody else? You're like, this is the course that I need. I almost look at it as public journaling,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, okay, I need help in my relationship. I need help in my business. And so I can bring this individual on, or I need help with fatherhood and I can bring Larry you on. And it's therapeutic for me. I take notes. I always do. I try to implement as much as I can on a regular basis. And it's like journaling, and then other people hopefully get some value of my own thoughts and my own path that I'm struggling to walk myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Selfishly, I always say that the podcast is a front row seat to the most amazing education imaginable. And I know you have felt the
Mm,
exact same way. And the cool thing that I always talk about with the audience, or the guys that do live with us or whatever, is that we get to go on this journey together, right? We get to learn together, right? We're in the front seat, we're in the virtual classroom, we get to learn together. The other thing too is, yes, I do it for myself. So even the pursuit of legendary fatherhood, I had all these ideas and all these concepts and all these things that we've been doing over the years, but I never had a place where I could actually put everything that we've done over the past 7 years. And then one final quick story. I'll never forget when I launched the Dad Edge book back in 2015. And that's, as I look back on it now, that's like the most basic dad book. Like, it's like, I feel like that was kindergarten, and now we're college level as far as information
mm,
goes. But I was talking to a coach of mine one time, and I was still in the infancy stage of Good Dad, and still in I mean, I think I was only podcasting for maybe 5 months. And I remember getting on a call with a coach, and I was like, man, I don't know if I want to hit the publish button on this book. And he's like, why not? I was like, well, I'm really putting myself out there. There's a lot of information in this book, like where I'm just an idiot, and, that kind of thing. And what if, what if it's received horrible? What if I get all these bad reviews? Like, what if it just sucks? Right? It's like all these imposter things going on. And my mentor looked at me and he goes, let me ask you a question. He goes, if you help one man, just one man, completely pivot his life, was it worth it? And I was like, yeah, it was worth it. And he goes, well, let me ask you this. He goes, writing this book, did it help you become a better father? Was it almost
mm,
like your mission statement in a book? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what it was. And he goes, then who cares?
mm.
Who cares? And I don't know what it was about him saying that, but I was like, publish, right?
Yeah.
Who cares what happens? This has improved my life. And I think it'll improve one, right? So yeah.
So what's changed between what you wrote in 2015, where you said you felt like that was kindergarten class, to now you're talking about college level classes? So, because look, honestly, I think of the advice that we share, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible. And this might diminish what we do, but it's true in my mind, anyways. Like, we all know what it means to be a good man. We all know basically things we should do to be good fathers, right? If I were to think of 2 to 5 things, I would say, make sure that you communicate, make sure that you look at the way you father from a long-term perspective, not just what is immediate gratification for you or them. Be willing to have hard conversations, and then introduce them to challenging experiences in life that they can overcome with your guidance and direction. And but that's pretty general. It's just, guys have a really, and I say guys, but me included, have a hard time following sometimes even our own advice.
Mm-hmm.
So what's changed between kindergarten and now this college class?
There's been so much that has changed. And I love the analogy that you talk about. Like we all know what it means to be a good man. And let me bring this back to something that you love, right? Which is jujitsu. I'm actually getting ready to start jujitsu myself.
Dude, you're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
I can't
Look at
wait,
those
man.
guns. I can see those guns, man. You and your son bodybuilding. And yeah, we'll have to get on the mats at some point.
It would be, oh, you will completely decimate me, I'm sure. Yeah, I did
Well, just
martial
in the
arts.
first, I don't know, a few months. And then after you have a few months under your belt, then I won't get on the mats with you anymore. But those, I want you the first few months though. You're mine.
All right, you're okay. Good deal, man. I did 10 years of martial arts from like 1999 to like 2010 for so about 11 years. And here's what I'll tell you, like going back to, what it, let me talk about what it means to be a good man first, right? Everyone, I think every man knows like, hey, I kind of know what this means to be a good man, right? I know what that looks like. But, and think about it from self-defense, right? Take someone who's never learned Brazilian jiu-jitsu and they're like, okay, if somebody attacks me, I have an idea of how I would defend myself. But tactically, I don't think I could do it if I was in the heat of it because my adrenaline would be going. I might freak out. Or what if this guy does this? I don't know how to defend against that. It's like all these things, right? That we just don't know. At a high level, it's like, okay, I know I have an idea of what self-defense is, but tactically in the trenches, when I'm faced with it, like, man, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. So Brazilian jiu-jitsu, obviously it takes you, right? And it takes you, it gives you the skills and the resources from a tactical standpoint of when this guy does this, you do this. When you're on top, you do that. When you feel this guy move this way, you go this way. So it's a very tactical thing. So what Dad Edge was, I think back in 2015, even if I take that book right in kindergarten, it was more like, hey, this is the overall theme of like what it means to connect with your kids. But I think the big miss in that book was, well, how do I do that from a tactical standpoint? Same thing with a marriage, right? How do I connect with my wife from a tactical standpoint? I missed the mark on that in that book because I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. Well, now we have a plethora, of skills that we teach men, as far as marriage goes. And we have 9 different, I have an entire course on 9 different skill sets to teach men how to better communicate with their wife, right? And how to better connect with their kids, how to create an environment of psychological safety where your kids are going to tell you more things. So things like that are more tactical versus more broad.
Hmm. I like that analogy I wrote down as you were talking about the martial arts thing is just the difference is knowledge versus wisdom, right?
Yeah.
We all know, like you said, if I get in a fight, I make a fist and I punch, like that sounds right. But then you've never done it before potentially. And so that's where the wisdom comes in. And what I wrote here is that when you train jujitsu, for example, or another martial art, it helps you to understand the variables that you can't see when you're watching a movie.
Yep.
Because you look at a choreographed fight and you think, oh, well, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what you don't recognize because it's a movie and it's not real is that the way that your body is responding, the fight or flight mentality, the way that individual is responding. There no two people fight the same, right? So the way that person, how it feels when you're exhausted, you're out of breath. How do you calculate for that? How do you calculate for a guy who's 30, 40, 50 pounds heavier than you or stronger than you? You can't account for those things. And I think the way that translates into fatherhood is we all know, okay, you need to be empathetic to your children, especially as they're dealing with stuff. But how do you do that when you're pissed off at them because they just yelled at you or their mother?
Yep.
That's a variable that you throw that little wrench into the equation and it changes everything.
It totally does. I mean, that's the thing. When we're at a heightened, so if you look at the two most important relationships in our life, right? Marriage and with our kids, it's like you said, it's an incredible experience, right? From a father perspective, from a husband perspective, it's one of the most incredible experiences that we'll have as men, right? And it's an incredible relationship that we'll have. However, it's also dynamic and it's highly emotionally charged, right? So there's probably no other human beings on the planet that can get under our skin like our kids, right? And there's no one else on the planet that we love more or like that we love our kids. The same with our wives. I work, I would say one thing we do in Data Edge that we really focus on, we actually have hard data on this. 80% of men who come to Data Edge want to create a better marriage. 80%, 8 out of 10 guys. So that is what's on their mind and heart is marriage. But the thing is that no one knows exactly what that looks like. So like, you were in the military. We're coming up actually as we're recording on Veterans Day. Marriage in our society is a lot like you walk down the aisle, you say I do, you get pats on the back. Hey man, this will be the best time of your whole life. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. I look at somebody like you, Ryan, who served in the military. Can you imagine showing up to basic training and they're like, hey man, there's no basic training anymore, but here's your firearm, here's your uniform. We're going to deploy you, but don't worry, you'll figure it out. Best time of your whole life. You'll figure it out. Like we don't do that, right? You
Right,
even
of
need,
course.
you even need to take a test and you need to be in a car with a police officer for them to sign off on you saying like, yes, you are capable and able to drive a vehicle in this state. But when it comes to marriage, like I honestly think, man, if every single married couple, every engaged couple was required to learn at least 2 or 3 skills within communication or conflict resolution, I think the divorce rate would actually decrease quite a bit. But that's the thing. We're not teaching these couples skills.
Yeah, well, I'm writing this down. Uh the other one I think of is emotional maturity. That's the one that gets to
Oh
me.
yeah.
Like I'm pretty well, I can be pretty stoic, but I can also be pretty emotional.
Mhm.
And I don't mean I'm slobbering and crying and babbling on like an idiot. That's not what but I can let my emotions get the better of me. And it usually manifests itself in frustration and anger.
Yeah.
And I think, in addition to what you're saying, communication skills, conflict resolution is emotional maturity.
Yep.
And I'm looking at that even in my own relationship with my wife and kids is like, all right, when my wife says something, how easily do I get triggered by that? And then I take it out of context. I usually will create my own context. She might mean something and I'll make it mean something completely different. And that's emotional. And then I try to justify it in my mind. I do the same thing with my kids. And then I take things personally. And then I go on the attack rather than just saying, tell me more about that. Like, that's a
Yeah.
great, that question right there alone is, oh, you're upset? Tell me more about that. I want to understand. That question alone, man, that's been really helpful. I wish I could say that I am better at that than I am, though. Again, this is what we're saying. Like, this is the
Yeah.
therapeutic side of it is like, I need this more so than any other guy listening. I'm sure of it.
And you just nailed something right there. I mean, one of the skills that and this is like super, super simple, but we all miss it big time. If you replace the word why with tell me more, the impact and how that lands for either your kids or your wife is completely different. So why actually psychologically puts someone in a corner? Why do you
Mm,
feel that way? Why did you do that? It literally brings us back to like our 2-year-old selves when our parents would point at us, be like, why are you crying? Why did you do that? So the word why actually puts a human being on the defense, especially kids or your wife or whatever. But tell me more is an invite. Tell me more. I want to know. Right. And it
mm.
will get you actually better information and it will actually calm the other person down. They'll feel more comfortable telling you whatever it is that they want to tell you. I mean, think about it. When someone asks us, hey, Ryan, why did you do that? Or, hey, Ryan, I saw that you did that. Tell me about that. It's a totally different feeling than the why question.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also think it's going to, I think the reason it probably leads to clarity and calmness, I should say calmness for them, is sometimes if people were to ask me if I got emotional and you said to me, hey, Ryan, tell me more about that. I don't know if I could immediately
Yeah.
because I probably just reacted emotionally. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't explain it.
Yeah.
And the same is true maybe with our wives and our children is like, okay, you did this thing. Tell me more about why you're feeling like that. Well, I don't know. I just did. Okay. And you get them to actually start to work through it themselves. I do see one of the traps that I fall into is sometimes a line of questioning comes across as either calculated or manipulating,
Yeah.
uh, or robotic,
Mm-hmm.
or some sort of I have an agenda
Yeah.
and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it to for my own good, not necessarily for yours.
It's interesting you say that because I just interviewed Lisa D'Amour, who wrote the book Untangled. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it's all about
I haven't.
it's all about raising teenage daughters
Oh,
and the
interesting.
stages that they go through. But here's the interesting thing. Before we hit the record button on that podcast, she told me, she's like, hey, I know that this is written for girls, but these rules are still the same for boys. But here's the interesting thing about questions, right? In our dad brains, right? I'm going to ask and this could also be tweens, right? So 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, whatever. In our dad brains, we're like, I want to connect with this kid. So I'm going to ask him or her some questions. But the way that lands for them, depending on the questions or depending on the voice tone or depending on the environment, is, why are you interrogating me? What's
Right.
your agenda? What do you want to know? And then that's when they're like, this is annoying. Like that's how our kids will interpret stuff like that. So that was fascinating to learn as well. So you're exactly right. And especially with our older kids, we got to be super careful. We got to be careful about the environment. We got to be careful about the questions sometimes, because we'll put them actually on the defense and we won't even know it. And they can't even articulate it either. They just know that they're like, why are you asking me this? And they're just like, kind of like back like this.
How do you know though? How do you know? I mean, obviously you can look for feedback, right? If they're detached or
Yeah.
withdrawing, then that's an indicator that something's not working.
Yeah.
But how do you know how you're coming across to your wife or to your children?
Let me take the kids first. So like I'll like my 16-year-old dude, that kid, his two favorite words, man, are "let's talk." I'm completely floored by that one, because
He
like
wants to. He likes
he
to talk.
wants to. Yeah, he's like,
Interesting.
but he's also has the type of personality though where he thinks out loud. So for
Mm.
him, talking gives him clarity. But every night before bed, let's talk. Like, and we spend 15 minutes talking. It's effortless with him. Now, I think he's an anomaly, and I think that's just his personality. And I think the reason he likes to talk is because he likes to get clarity and he gets his thoughts out. Now, my 14-year-old man, he's your typical teenager. He's stoic. He's quiet, and it's like a pry bar sometimes. And the one thing I've noticed with his personality type is, number one, I can't take it personally if he doesn't want to talk in the moment that I want to talk.
Yeah,
Right.
good point.
It's just my job is to show him that I'm there when he wants to, and to extend the invite when he wants to. But here's another really cool thing. If I let's just say I want to have a connected conversation with my 14-year-old, right? If I take my 16-year-old out to Buffalo Wild Wings, it's easy, right? We talk about everything, right? For my 14-year-old, that's very intimidating for us to sit across from each other right away. So for him, the best thing that we can do is to do an activity first, because that's what actually brings him connection. I know for you, Ryan, like one of the biggest things you do with your boys is like hunting, right? And you do all kinds of different things. But I would imagine that when you're on hunting trips with your boys, or doing something like that, or doing something physical, like I know you train with your boys, I train with my boys, that some of the best conversations and the best connections actually are happening usually during that time or right after that time. It's never usually when I want to sit down and be like, hey, man, I want to talk to you about a few things. Boom. Usually
Yeah,
that garage door is
shut
shut.
down.
Yeah. So the activity comes first, the connection comes first, and then we get to connect after that if he wants to.
Yeah, that's good. My two oldest sons are like your 14-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
where I'll ask, hey, how's your day? Good. What was
Good.
your favorite part? Oh, this one thing. Care to elaborate? No, I'm good.
Um,
What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? No, nothing. It's like, I'm gonna wring your neck, because I'm more like your 16-year-old.
yeah.
I like to talk, and every time I talk, even if they're difficult conversations, I feel better. If I
Yeah.
talk, I just feel better. But that's not how it goes in my household
Yep.
with mom or the kids, except for my daughter. My daughter's a talker. She's like me. So it tends to be a challenge at times. A lot of the times it really does, because I want to talk and nobody seems to want to talk.
Yeah. And, I'm kind of the same. Well, I guess mine is, it kind of depends on my mood, but like for my wife and my 14-year-old have extremely similar personalities. They're very stoic. They're introverted, they're quiet, and they do not like to be pried open for information. So
Right.
like, for instance, if I want to have a really good conversation, like if I go out to my wife right now And she's out there working on the house. She's trying to like literally sprint to get things done before the kids get home from school. Now, if I sit down and be like, hey, you want to talk about a few things? She'll be like,
Bad timing.
yeah, I'm like right in the middle of things, right? Now, however, if I take her like this Friday, I take every Friday a half day, and she and I have a date and or date. And so what I've noticed is if she and I go on a hike, we go work out, we go for a walk or something like that. It's like suddenly she wants to talk about everything, right? And that's because those distractions aren't around. We're sharing in an experience together, which one of the things we teach, we talk about tactical skills, right? What we're really talking about here is psychological safety. And that's one of the things that we teach quite a bit is how to create an environment of psychological safety with either your wife or your kids where they want to open up and talk to you and where you can connect, right? And it doesn't, human beings are like, well, I want to connect and I want to have a conversation. So I'm just going to barrel in and we're going to have this conversation. That's what we call going to a conversation with expectation and agenda, right? And people sense that a mile away. But if you go to a conversation with the right environment and instead of expectation, you go with appreciation and curiosity, you're going to have a way better conversation and you're going to have a way better connection.
You're going too fast. I'm writing notes. I'm telling you, I just like take so many notes. I like that. So no agenda. You talked about, you go into it with appreciation and curiosity. Curiosity is such a great word. I mean, it's not just the word, obviously, but the meaning behind it. It's such a powerful way to, it's almost weird saying that as a tactic. Cause you said, here's some tactic, go with curiosity, but you can't really, if you make it too much of a tactic, then it actually is the opposite of curiosity.
Yeah.
Cause curiosity is just, it's genuine. Like I care about you. Right? Like Larry, I care about you. So I'm genuinely curious about what you have to say. This is not an agenda. I did not come to this conversation with bullet points that I wanted to cover. I didn't come with predetermined questions because I care too much about you for that. But then we do it in the conversations that we have with our wives and our kids and our employees or our clients. That's why I completely got away from asking canned questions in conversations because it blows up the conversation before it even had a chance to turn into something really, really meaningful.
Yep. You're exactly right. I do that in podcast. You do it in podcasts. I do it in podcasts. I have noticed, and this is kind of in the early days, and I know you probably did the same thing I did, is I would do all my homework on these guests, right? I'd have my agenda and then I'd have an expectation of how this podcast is going to turn out. And here's the crazy thing. When I stuck to my agenda, it felt awkward. I could tell it felt awkward for the other person. It felt robotic. It didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel like we even connected or whatever. And what I do now is I do homework on these people, but I want to go, I always ask the person, if we were celebrating the most amazing interview at the end of this interview, what are you telling me we talked about that's most meaningful to you? And then they'll just give me some high level themes that they really, really want to talk about. And then as soon as I see them like come to life and their energy goes up, that's where I really dive in and go hard, go deeper, right? Because that's where that connection really is. And the funny thing is I'm sure you've heard this a million times. I've heard it, and it still surprises me sometimes. I'll get off of a podcast and they'll be like, dude, like even you interviewed Matthew McConaughey. I interviewed him, and after we stopped hitting the record button, he's like, dude, I've done thousands of interviews. He goes, how long have you been doing this for? And I was like, 6 years. He's like, you're one of the best interviewers I have ever come across. I was like, holy shit, man. I wish I would have had that still recorded. Right. But I even asked him, I was like, why do you say that? He's like, cause it felt like a conversation. It just felt like we were talking like over coffee. It didn't feel like you were trying to like come in with all these questions. And he even used the word, your agenda, it was a conversation. And the same holds true in our personal relationships.
Yeah, good point. One thing I want to pivot a little bit on the conversation topic. Let's say that you get your wife opens up to you or your kids open up to you or anybody, it doesn't really matter. How do you keep your cool in heated moments? Because I know that's an issue for a lot of guys is, your wife's going to come at you and say something that you're not going to like. Your kids are going to say things that you're not excited about. So how do you maintain that emotional maturity and coolness when you do get triggered and upset by the conversation that's taking place? Because I just want to put a little frame on this is you're talking about psychological safety. If you blow up, That's the antithesis of safety.
Yep.
And you're going to train people not to talk to you anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think you probably grew up the same way I did. And basically the message was, don't come and talk to me about things that are really big and personal. Cause I'm going to probably blow up, throw it in your face or something like that. And also, like, if I felt a certain way about something growing up, it was wrong, right? You're wrong for feeling that way. Shame on you. How dare you, right? So, to answer your question, a lot of it has to do with, it's very hard, especially if it's something that's like going for the jugular, or it's something like, oh man, like that's really, really difficult. I'll give you an example of a skill that we learned from a company called Clear Leadership. And we always have to give them credibility or credit where credit's due. Clearleadership.com. We are coached on a skill set called the cube. Have you ever heard of the cube?
I don't think so. Maybe.
Yeah. So the cube is a 4-step process. It's actually very easy of how to have triggered conversations or how to have intense conversations. So it's a 4-step process around observations, thoughts, feelings, and wants. So if you let's just take this as an example of a triggered conversation, or where I could get triggered or my wife could get triggered. This is a true story. Let's just say that my wife and I haven't been intimate for a while, right? Maybe, we average a couple times a week. I think this was months and months ago. We went like, God, man, we were doing like once a month, like maybe every 2 weeks. And I was kind of getting concerned. I was like, man, this is kind of crazy. Like, and then the stories like start to roll in, right? Well, shit, man, we've been together for 26 years and maybe I'm old news, right? Maybe she just doesn't like me anymore. Like all these things I was
or
telling
maybe
myself.
she's sleeping around, or, there's
Right.
all sorts of stories we come up with.
Right. All kinds of crazy things. Right. Which made me triggered before I even had the conversation. Right. So, I wanted to open up the conversation with her. Now, before learning that skill, most human beings, most men, and me included, would go into that conversation and be like, hey, why aren't we having sex that often anymore? Like, I don't understand what's going on. Are you not attracted to me? Are you too tired? Like, is the stress level too high? Like, what's going on? Right. Now, how that's going to land for my wife is terrible. She's going to automatically get on the defensive, and we're probably going to have a really triggered conversation where it's actually going to disconnect us more than connect us. So the whole point of the cube is to actually keep calm, right? And it's GPS for triggered conversations. You actually know exactly where you're at in the conversation by the cube. So the observation, this is what it would look like. So I gave you an example of what bad looks like. This is what something good looks like. So I'll start with an observation in the right voice tone. Hey, I've noticed over the past few months that our intimacy hasn't been nearly as frequent as it used to be. That's an observation, right? She can agree to it, and so can I.
Sure.
The thought I have now, the difference between a thought and a feeling is a thought is a sentence and a feeling is a word. So, but a lot of people get this screwed up. Be like, I feel like you don't love me anymore, or I feel like you're not attracted to me. That's not a feeling. That's actually a thought. So how I transition from observation to thought is I say something like, I've noticed that we just haven't been intimate as frequently over the past couple months. And the story that I'm telling myself, the thoughts that I have around that is, maybe you're not as attracted to me as you used to be. And that's the own story I'm telling myself. That's my own stupid insecurities coming out. Or maybe it's the fact that we're just so busy and we're so exhausted by the end of the day. Or maybe it's because, maybe our sex life has gotten routine. So those are the 3 thoughts. The feeling, then, how I feel about that is I feel frustrated,
right?
And I feel
rejected,
a little rejected. Yeah. And then you go to the want, right? Because what I truly want is to be more intimate with you more often, because that's when I feel we're the closest. Now, when I end off with the want, here's how that lands, right? When I end off with the want versus like her feeling like I'm attacking, like, why are we having sex anymore? In her mind, usually what happens in that conversation is the want that you have is usually, not always, but usually someone in line with what they want to, or that the way it lands for them is they're at least going to be less defensive. And the way my wife responded to that, she's like, you're absolutely right. And the story that you're telling yourself isn't true. I'm very attracted to you. I've just been so tired. We've been so busy. And by the time it gets to be night, like, I'm exhausted. And the actual solution that we came after that conversation was, let's just not have sex at night anymore, because we're both tired. Let's just have sex during the day. So the cool thing that the agreement that we made is like, let's just take it off the table, take the pressure off at night, because it's too we're just too tired. But let's have all the sex we want during the day. The kids are in school. So that's what we agreed on.
Okay, so that's awesome. It worked like it was supposed to, right? But what happens when it doesn't? Because I mean, that's a powerful framework, the cube. I like that. I wrote that down.
Yeah.
So let's say you use this cube type method. And again, I'm even hesitant. I don't even like calling it the cube because then it's a tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be used tactically, but if you use it as a tactic, then I think it loses some of his genuineness, right?
Right.
So that's just one thing I think we need to be aware of. But let's say it doesn't work out like that. You go through the observation, you go through the thoughts, you go through the feelings and the wants. And let's say a partner's wants are different. Or let's say that your thoughts of I'm not attractive anymore. She's like, yeah, that's exactly right. And it doesn't work out like you just explained. Like, what
Yeah,
do you
man.
do from there?
Yeah, because we've all had conversations like that where we're not
Of
aligned, we're
course.
not on the same page. Let me talk quickly about the tactic part of it, and then I'll get to the to when this doesn't work out the way you want it. Because man, do I get a load of those stories too.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so tactically, like let's go back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? When you learn a rear naked choke, right, for the first time, you're like, okay, to be honest, I don't know how to do it, Ryan. So like, I'm just, okay, I got to do this, and then I got to put my arm here, and then I have to like put the other arm here, and then on the back of his neck, and then I got to bear down. So like, tactically, you're going through the steps one by one. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I need to do. So you're not in flow state. It doesn't come naturally, and it feels awkward and clunky at first, right? Because it's kind of a tactic. Now, for you, you've been doing jujitsu how long?
About 3.5, almost 4 years now.
Okay. So for you to throw in a rear naked choke, you probably don't even really have to even think about it at this point.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's
Sure.
just part of how you operate now. And it's part of how you do jujitsu. Tactically, when people first start learning these things, the feedback is this feels really awkward. Well, good. It absolutely should because you haven't done it. It's a
It's
skill that
new.
you haven't. But over time, it just becomes the way you communicate. And for you, it just becomes the way you defend yourself. So yeah, tactically, it feels really awkward at first. And over time, it just becomes a part of who you are. Now, when things don't go the way that you want it, and they will, right? So that's when, so like if you're, if Jessica were to tell me like, yeah, it really boils down to I haven't been as attracted to you as I used to be. And I'll be really honest, Ryan, we've gone through conversations like that.
I've had that conversation with my wife 100%.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
most guys have. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. And this is where you really have to be, this is where curiosity and appreciation really comes into play. Let me caution you with this too. Just because your wife is going to give you feedback like this, that does not mean you're a doormat. That doesn't mean she talks to you disrespectfully. My wife talks to me very respectfully, right? A lot of guys think like, well, if I ask for feedback and I'm curious and I'm appreciative, then she can just treat me however she wants. She can call me names and walk all over me. Absolutely not.
Mm.
Absolutely not. Okay. There are boundaries that we operate within. So if I ask my wife, which I have, right? So she's like, yeah, to be honest, like I haven't been as attracted to you as I used to be. Now, for me, I'm like,
Yeah, it
oh,
sucks.
that stings, right? You're like, okay. Now here's where I think men can be more evolved. Like, you and I have been doing this work for a long time. So I think for you and I, we can have conversations like that where it feels maybe a little bit more objective versus like it still stings and it still sucks and it really freaking hurts. But at the same time, you're like, okay, I also know on the other side of this feedback, I'm going to learn something and I'll learn what's going on for her because I'd rather know than not know. So my wife would
I
be like,
also think, Larry, on that, just to interject real quick, I
yeah,
also think that if we're being honest, the majority of the time we feel the same way, like the not attractive. I'd be willing to bet because I know I have where I've put on, 20, 30 pounds. And she's like, yeah, I'm just not as attracted to you, or sex is kind of awkward, because you're
yeah,
30 pounds heavier. Like,
yeah,
okay, but if I look in the mirror, I know that it's gotten out of hand for me too.
yeah,
And so if she's giving you that feedback, that's good. She's actually giving you a roadmap
yeah,
because now okay, well, she doesn't like
yeah,
the pot belly. What woman does? Is there a woman?
right.
No. And also, you probably don't feel great about yourself either. So it's a win-win. And at
Yeah.
least she's willing to communicate. What if she didn't communicate it with you?
That's more dangerous.
I think so.
Totally more dangerous. The feedback my wife gave me was earlier this year. Because like I felt distance between us. I did the exact same thing. This conversation was a real conversation that we had last spring. I was in the best shape of my life because I was getting ready for a show with my 14-year-old at the time. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought like, wait, why are you not attracted? Well, it wasn't physical. She's like, she looked at me and she goes, and I've done shows in the past. I haven't done one in 10 years. And she's like, I hate when you do shows. And I'm like, why? She goes, because like you're disconnected, you're tired, you're irritable, you have less patience with the kids, you have less patience with me, you don't really connect with me like you usually do. You don't really talk to me as much. And plus, like while you're training with Mason, like I'm lifting all the heavy load over here and getting dinners ready and all this other stuff while you guys are training. She's like, that really impacts how attracted I am to you as a man and husband. And I'm like, oh, so it had nothing to do with how I looked aesthetically. It had everything to do with
Mm-hmm.
how I was operating and how distracted I was and how irritable I was. And because my diet was so tight and like my patience was less with the kids, I was way quicker to anger. And I was like, oh, I even told her, I was like, that sucks to hear that. I was like, but you know what? There's some truth there.
Of
And now I
course.
know what I can do differently, right? Because now it's not a question mark. Now I knew.
I think that goes back to our being genuinely curious because if our curiosity ends at an answer we don't like,
Mm-hmm.
then we probably really weren't curious. We were trying to get to the bottom of something, or you're probably trying to get somebody to say something to validate us.
Yeah.
Like, hey, it seems like you're not attracted to me anymore. And you're kind of waiting. You're like, please don't
Yeah.
say, like, please say you're still attracted. And then she gives you something else, and you're like, oh. And then you blow up, or you cry, or you make it about you. And then that wasn't curiosity. That was manipulation. You were just trying to get
Yep.
an answer that made you feel better about yourself.
Yep. Fishing for
If you were
compliments.
yeah, right. Yeah. If you were genuinely curious, you would, and I'm saying, again, I'm saying you, I'm talking to me too, but if I was genuinely curious, I would say, okay, thank you. What about me is not attractive to you? And then you would actually go to work
Yep.
because curiosity requires the work, the follow up, the follow through on what you're talking with your kids or your partner or your client or whoever it is about.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, man. It's it's such a challenge because there's another person who has a say in the matter.
There
Wouldn't
is.
it be
Yeah.
easier if it's like, yeah, I can have conversations with other people, but at the end of the day, it's like it's gonna be my way. And we
Yeah.
we try to do that. It doesn't work though, obviously.
Yeah. Here's the other thing too. And I don't know if you see this in Iron Council. I see this in the Alliance, but some guys will take what you and I just talked about, where they're asking for genuine feedback so they can pivot, right? And their wife completely bulldozes them, emasculates them, calls them names, yells at them. And some of the guys think like, well, if I'm asking that I just have to take that. I have to be it's part of the game if I'm disrespected. No, it's not. There are guardrails that you have to put in your relationships. Like Jessica and I have ways that we operate that we do not deviate from. So like for instance, if you have feedback like that for the other person, you share that feedback out of love. You don't share it to put a knife in somebody's back, right? So my wife will gently, calmly, and she did, gave me that feedback. And she didn't call me names. Like Jessica and I, 26 years I've known her. I have never called her a bitch. She's never called me any names. She's never called me an asshole or anything like that. And when we have disagreements, we speak calmly to each other, right? We don't like go for the jugular. The other thing too is any past transgressions that we've done that we've already overcome and gotten through, those are never brought up again. And a lot of people are like, well, you remember that thing you did to me 10 years ago? And then it just goes in circles, right? So, you know, I would be, if you're going to have conversations like this, you have to agree with your wife on a way that you're going to operate and communicate. And being disrespected and emasculated it ain't one of them.
So do you do that ahead of time? Like, do you come up with those guidelines ahead of time, or even in the spur of the moment? Do you, hey, look, that's out of bounds? Like, how do you bring up those guardrails?
Yeah. So Jessica and I brought up these guardrails years and years and years ago, right? And it is the way that we have stuck to. Like we have failed at quite a few things, but that's one thing that I can stake the flag in the ground and say we haven't deviated from that. And I think that's where a lot of couples get tripped up. And this is where, a triggered conversation will get triggered is if you break the rules of how you communicate, right? If you're
Mm.
calling each other names, like if that's the way you're operating, if you're screaming and yelling at each other and, just putting each other down, you're not going to, you got to solve that issue first before you can have better communication.
So if that's taking place, because I imagine there's a lot of guys, and even in I'm very similar in yours. Maybe I have not been as good over our my wife and I, our history, the way that you guys have, but we have been pretty good about that for the most part. Uh, and I don't know if we've ever spoken those rules necessarily. Maybe they're just unspoken, but we've been pretty good about that for the most part. If that's taking place in somebody's communication, is it best for a guy who hasn't established those guardrails or who has let that behavior happen in the past to him? Is it best to call it out? Is it best to disengage in the moment? Like, how would you, like, let's say your woman's calling you names
Mm-hmm.
or like attacking you personally. What's the best course of action in the moment if you have not yet established those guardrails?
Yeah, so I have a client right now that we're working through that as we speak, right? And so an example of that is, he would have some heated conversations with his wife, and then she'd start calling him names.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I coached during one of our coaching sessions. I'm like, you guys have to establish not necessarily you don't talk to me that way, this and that. Like basically, you're the one calling the shots. What you have to do is you have to come together before these things get heated and create an agreement,
Mm.
right? It's an agreement. It's not because I want you to do this or you want me to do that. It's the agreement is the thing that actually holds the weight. It's not me, it's not you, it's the agreement that we made. Right? So you have to come with the agreement first. If someone breaks the agreement, like for instance, he got in a heated discussion with his wife, they had created this agreement and he looked at her and said, "We agreed not to speak to each other this way, so I'm going to walk away, and until we're willing to speak to each other in the way that we agreed upon, I'm not going to have this conversation." And he
Mm.
walked. And his wife, within the next hour, came up to him and said, "You were right. I'm sorry. Let's talk again." But it was
That's
him standing.
powerful.
It is. It was him standing his ground, not confidently, calmly. He didn't engage in calling her name back. He just simply emulated the agreement that they made. And the fact that he was like, "I'm not having this conversation until we're aligned in the agreement once again. So I'm going to walk away. And when you're ready to have the conversation with what we agreed upon, I'll come back."
It's a very masculine, manly approach. And I would go so far as to say, and I'm not saying that women aren't capable of not being emotional. That's not what I'm saying. But I would go so far as to say that to engage in that behavior based on emotion would be more of a feminine approach.
Yeah.
And to say, no, we agreed. I'm putting my foot down.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm willing to come back to the table when you're ready to engage the way that we said. That's a very masculine approach. And I think it actually helps guys who have been emasculated start to reestablish some of that masculinity. And by the way, that's very attractive to a woman.
Yep. Because you're
It's
leading her.
very
Yeah.
exactly. And yourself, you're leading yourself.
And
You're saying,
yourself.
I'm worth being respected, even in disagreement. I am
Yep.
worth being respected. And that's attractive to people.
Yep. There's one other example that I'll share here, and it's really quick, but I have this individual works for me, and he went through years and years of just emotional beatdowns, and through us talking, he finally he sat down with her one day, and this was about 9 months ago, and their marriage has completely changed, totally changed. He sat down with her very, very calmly, and he said, "Been doing a lot of thinking, and I am fully committed to you. I'm fully committed to this marriage, and I love you. And I'm also fully committed to ending this marriage. If you
Hmm.
if you keep treating me the way you have and the way that we agreed upon, we didn't agree that you would treat me like this. So if that's the case, I'm also committed to leaving." And he said it that calm. He's like, "Dude, I don't know what it was for her, but boom, she hired a therapist. She got help. she completely changed how she started talking to him. But it took that calm conversation that was outside of like this emotionally charged argument that could have been, right? But he stood his ground.
Mm-hmm. And a level of assertiveness, because
Mm-hmm.
it would have been, and again, manly. It would have been very easy to bury your head in the sand and not do anything about it, not say anything about it, and eventually get so pissed off and then just blow up the marriage and not even give your partner a chance to get better. Like that's not right either.
It's not at
Yeah.
all.
Awesome, Larry. Look, man, I know you're on a hard stop here and I want to be respectful of your time. You got to get going, but I've really appreciated our friendship and, of course, our
Me too.
conversations, even offline, the ones that aren't recorded. But this is really powerful. Psychological safety, being able to create this in communication with your wife and kids. Tell the guys where they can connect with you to learn more about what you're doing and what you have going on.
Yeah, the best thing is just the dadedge.com. I mean, we've got all of our resources there. I've got a couple different things. So like free 25 intimate conversation starters. It's a video training which actually teaches men how to create psychological safety, but also I give you a list through a PDF of 25 different questions that you can use to deepen your intimacy and your connection with your wife that are conversation starters. They're not just rapid fire questions. So that's a resource for you. But as far as the podcast goes, I mean, you can find the podcast, I think, literally everywhere now, wherever you listen to podcasts. But and then next year we have Dad Edge Summit. In October, we already have 110 tickets sold for next year's
Awesome.
event. So if you want to be a part of that, you can find that there as well. So yep,
And
that's about it.
you just wrapped the last summit up last
Yeah,
month, then October. Yeah, cool. It looked
yeah,
cool. I saw some pictures and some mutual friends that had attended and they
yeah.
had great things to say. So
Thank you, man. Yeah, I'm back at you. I don't think I've ever met anybody who's gone to an Order of Man event who didn't just think it was freaking awesome, man. So I know you put
you just
on
haven't met
awesome.
enough of them. That's it. I'm sure. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure of it. We try to do good, but we don't always get it right. Larry, I appreciate you, brother. I really do,
I
and
got
I
you.
don't take that word brother lightly. I do really appreciate your friendship and all that you're doing for men and me as well. Thanks, man.
Back at you, man.